Welcome to the Humanity Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy. This episode is another of our First Friday sessions. And if you've not come across First Friday sessions yet, you can go to humanity.com where you can register for a 1-hour Zoom work session, first Friday of every month, apart from a couple in the summer. And we have a structure that puts you in a breakout group with some other smart people just to get to know each other. Then one of our humanists will present on a topic. Then we throw you back into the breakout room for some conversation before closing with the large group Q&A and kicking you out of there within 50 minutes. People are saying the topic is usually thought-provoking and the networking with a great group of people is useful too. So feel free to join us. But this time around, we're talking about transformative discussions. Here's Jim Marshall.
Thank you, David. We're going to talk about transformative discussions. It's picking up on where we've been. If you tuned in last month and we're thinking about group decision making, let's talk what is a transformative discussion. We asked you that question at the outset. What are some common issues you face? Because when a team faces an issue, that's the moment when it almost feels to me like you get thrust into the transformative discussion. In a word, I would say it's often a disagreement, but it doesn't have to be a problem or a negative thing. And we'll look at that a little more as we keep looking at things. I've got 3 things planned that I hope will be that nugget of value that you take away from this conversation. I want to talk a little about how we engage in transformative discussions, the idea of the green path versus the red path. I want to look into the stages of a transformative discussion because I think being clear about that can help make sure we have a better outcome in our transformative discussions. And then I think of number 3 as my motivational carrot. It's the what happens when we don't engage. It's not good things. So we'll talk about that to try to motivate all of us that when I'm aware that there's an issue facing my team, I really do need to hop on the green path and I've got to go engage in the right conversation. Even as I look at some of our chat comments, senior leadership buy-in, that's a difficult situation. That's a difficult issue to face. How to engage in the green path, that can be tricky. Let me start with a story of a transformative discussion in my life. Many, many years ago, I led about 20 college students to China for a 6-week summer project. And it was the kind of thing where a US student got paired up with a Chinese college student and they lived together 24/7. They had meals together in the mornings, they did lectures, in the afternoons, we did excursions, we played games at night. Oh, it was a really intense experience for 4 weeks. We're nearing the end of this 4-week experience, and I've got a counterpart who's been living and working in China. And so he's recruited the Chinese college students, interfaced with the Chinese university, all of these things. And he says to me, hey, I tried to get tickets for Monday, which is the day we were going to end the program and go back to Beijing for a week of kind of debriefing and preparing to re-enter. And he's like, I can't get tickets on Monday. We're just going to have to go on Tuesday. And as we explore, I'm like, well, what do you mean? What does that mean? And what happens is I'm saying to him, I don't want to lose a day of my 3 days of debriefing because it's really important to me that we capitalize on this experience that students have had. I want them to reflect on what they've learned. I want them to think about things they're going to do differently when they get home. There's stress of re-entering the US culture. So there was a lot baked into these 3 days, and it felt too costly to me to lose a whole day. Whereas my counterpart, Steve, is saying, just change the schedule and we'll leave on Tuesday. One of the ideas that really brought us to that difficult disagreement was I said, well, why don't we just leave on Monday? We'll go across town to a hotel. We'll hole up in a conference room. We'll start our debriefing schedule and then we'll hop the train on Tuesday. And he's saying that doesn't work because if we run, they won't understand why we stayed in the city. And so essentially, we've got this disagreement. Steve wants to extend it by a day. I don't want to lose the day in training, and we're stuck. And with that, I want to move into what great teams do great. If you've had a chance to, you could go to the Humanergy website and the freebies or the resources section, you can download this picture of what great teams do great. So for those of you who are less familiar with it, the heart of the model is that A team spends time getting set up, planning the work, and then doing the work. And what we want to focus on today is when teams are doing the work and issues arise. When issues arise, that's when we as leaders, I always think of it this way: if there's anything that pops up that's hindering high performance, that's hindering us from doing what we need to be doing, then that's an issue. And as soon as I'm aware of it, I face a choice of going the green path or going the red path. So I want to pull up and highlight what are the green path. I always think of the green path and red path as both a mindset and a choice set, or it's how I think and it's how I behave as well. On the green path is being caring, honest, and direct. We always think of that like a three-legged stool. You got to have all three legs or the stool doesn't work. What's most common is, or I think of as one of the more common, is when someone's honest and direct, but they really lack the care. So it comes across as blunt, harsh, maybe a little aggressive. But think of the other behaviors and the mindset. There's an orientation towards listening. There's an openness to engage, to align, to learn, to coordinate. There's a willingness to share perspectives. There's a willingness to be data driven. There's a focus that's forward into the future on the solution versus backward onto the problem, onto what hasn't happened or what is holding us back. Contrast that with the red path, where you might have any number of either dishonest, uncaring, or indirect elements of conversation. The red path to me can feel like an aggressive place. And when someone goes on the attack and they go after what they want, maybe it's yelling, maybe it's really intense or pounding of a fist. It also can feel kind of passive. It's when, well, Bob's that way and there's nothing we can do about it. So we're just going to have to work around and do Bob's work for him. That's an accommodation. So it tends to be a little more passive. There's the avoiding, the hoping that it goes away. So there's the green path, there's the red path. And we think of that as that is how I go into transformative discussions. At the moment that I know there's an issue, at the moment that I'm going to try to engage in that issue, am I going to go onto the green path or am I going to go onto the red path? This conversation between me and Steve, my counterpart in China back in the day, when I think about, I don't remember today exactly what was said, but I know it felt like being on the green path. And maybe that's kind of instructive for us on what does it look like when you're really on the green path. I remember thinking, or maybe even saying things like, Steve, I care about the relationships with the Chinese people, the university officials and the students. I don't want to do any harm. And I recognize that that's more important to you, who's going to stay and live and work here all the time. But, I want you to understand, I care about you and I care about what you care about. And I felt like Steve did the same thing for me. Hey, I understand that 3 days is not a lot of time to get people ready to head back into the US and to really capitalize on what this experience is going to mean for them in their lifetime. So I knew he cared about that. And because we did that work around affirming, being on the green path, trying to say, we really are stuck here. I don't know what we're going to do. It led to that one of us asking the question, well, what if we actually leave the city? We can't leave on a train, but could we leave on a bus? Can we go to the next city down the line, pick up the bus on Tuesday, but that way there's not a risk at damaging the relationships. And I want to point out the stages of transformative discussion. If you're listening, you can see there's an understanding stage, there's an agreement stage, and then there's a commitment stage. For our purposes, you probably can imagine times that you've been in a transformative discussion where someone's demanding or expecting commitment, and yet we really haven't spent the right amount of time in agreement or in getting everyone's perspective on the table. And maybe we haven't even spent the amount of time we need to establish mutual understanding, to establish that we really do know we've got all our perspectives, we've got all the perspectives on the table. If someone's demanding commitment and we haven't done the work around agreement and debate or the work around establishing mutual understanding, then inevitably that's not the high quality kind of a commitment. The same token, you can imagine times, if you've ever seen somebody, we sometimes joke around and call it violent agreement. Two people are saying the same thing, but it sounds like they're disagreeing. To me, that's often maybe an indicator that we're having debate, but we haven't established mutual understanding. There's an assumption that I know what you're talking about, or that I know your perspective, but maybe I really haven't paused and double checked. To me, if we're in debate and there's an assumption of mutual understanding that's wrong, then we're really wasting time. We call that unnecessary conflict. Because if you've ever been in a conversation like that, when the misunderstanding surfaces, it's like, oh, well, if that's what you meant, then there's really no problem here. The solution is obvious. Let's just move forward, right? So to me, there's real value in understanding. First, I need to double check that we have mutual understanding. And for Steve and I, that was like, hey, I really care about, for you, what's important is not risking these relationships, not kind of doing any harm. For me, what's important is protecting the 3 days. That's us working through the understanding stage. Because what happens as we make clear our shared understanding is we establish that there's a lot of common ground we share. We both care about these things. And then here's the sticking point. The sticking point is I want to leave Monday and part ways with our Chinese counterparts. And Steve's thinking that that's not really an option. And so then we start brainstorming for a solution. And the solution became, let's ride the bus to the next town over. The third thing that I want to talk about when it comes to transformative discussions is the slippery slope. If you're listening in and not able to see it, the idea is that I can engage in getting on the green path early, or I can get on the green path late. And the relationship between getting in early and late versus how easy it is to identify a solution and to go after the solution is the earlier I get in to a transformative discussion, the earlier that I step into talking about an issue, the more likely it's going to be easy or it's going to be simpler to find a solution. Contrast that with if I'm aware of an issue and I choose the red path. Maybe it's just I think, well, it's only one time. Let's give it some time. Maybe it will go away. You can see this middle stage that we call the avoid stage. Not worried about it. It'll take care of itself. I hope it just goes away. As I let time go by, making that red path choice, there comes a moment where experiences build on one. I almost think of it as layer upon layer. And as you add more layers to an issue, it becomes that much more complex. Often it becomes more emotional, it becomes personal, and it becomes that much more difficult to engage in the transformative discussion, or for either two individuals or a group of people to get in and have that healthy, productive debate about what are we going to, what is the real issue? What are our options? What solutions do we want to implement? So I brought up the slippery slope because what I mainly wanted to point out is you pay now or you pay later. And if you choose to pay now, if you choose to engage in going after resolving issues that are hindering high performance on your team or in your situation, then you tend not to have, it's more expensive and it's more difficult when you pay later, right? It's almost always more time consuming, almost always more expensive, either in terms of real dollars or just in terms of time and effort. So this is meant to be kind of that motivational carrot that you don't want to, if you're aware of issues, you don't want to let them slide. So if I recap quickly where we've talked about what is a transformative discussion. We've talked about how do you engage in them, and that is you bring a green path mindset and choice set. We've talked about how a great transformative discussion needs to build from mutual understanding. We need to know that we are on the same page before we engage in the debate that's going to ultimately lead to a decision, a solution, and a way forward. And then we need to engage as soon as we know there's an issue that, requires our attention, requires focus, requires a group of people to dialogue and identify a solution. The later that we wait, the more costly, the more time consuming, the more expensive, the more difficult it is to find that solution.
That was the Humanity Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanity, go to humanity.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.